The cabin cost me 25 cents. Not in a metaphorical sense. The final court filing fee, to record the quiet title judgment. The crisp quarter I handed the county clerk that officially extinguished all other potential claims and made the property irrevocably mine, was 25 cents. Of course, that quarter was the final stone laid upon a foundation that had cost me 2 years of my life. Thousands in legal notices published in obscure newspapers, and a level of meticulous, soul-crushing due diligence that had once been the hallmark of my career. My name is Leo Vance, and, for a decade, I was the legal equivalent of a ghost. I worked for a firm so exclusive, it didn't have a name on its door. A place where nation-states and megacorporations came when they needed to unravel legal knots a century old. My specialty was land. Specifically, land that nobody wanted. Land with titles so clouded, so tangled with ancient liens, forgotten heirs, and surveying errors, that it was rendered worthless. I would descend into the archives, untangle the mess, and emerge with a clean, marketable title for my clients, who would then build their empires upon it. I was, for all intents and purposes, a paper-shuffling necromancer, raising value from the dead. But the work was a poison. It leached the color from the world, turning forests into tracts, rivers into riparian rights, and human homes into parcels. So I quit. I walked away with enough money to last a dozen lifetimes and a profound, aching need to build something with my hands instead of with a fountain pen. That's when I found the cabin. It was a 2-acre island of legal chaos on the edge of the pristine, aggressively manicured Whispering Pines estates. The property had belonged to a reclusive old man who had died decades prior, intestate, and with no known heirs. The county had seized it for back taxes, but the sale was botched. The title was a nightmare, a Gordian knot of conflicting claims and missing paperwork. It was perfect. It was the last puzzle I would ever solve, and the prize would be my own. For a year after the title was cleared, I worked. I poured a new foundation. I replaced every log that was rotten, learning the art of joinery from old books and online videos. I put on a new roof, milled the floors from fallen oaks on the property, and rebuilt the stone fireplace by hand. I was no longer Leo Vance, Esquire. I was just Leo, a man covered in sawdust and sweat, a man who felt the satisfying ache of physical labor in his bones each night. I was at peace. And then, one sun-drenched Tuesday afternoon, a gleaming black Lexus SUV, the kind that costs more than a small house, crunched to a stop on my new gravel driveway. A woman emerged. She was in her 50s, with hair the color of spun gold, frozen in a severe, aerodynamic style. She wore a tailored blazer, sharply creased slacks, and a look of profound offense, as if she had just smelled something foul. I was on a ladder, applying a final coat of linseed oil to the trim around a window. I paused, brush in hand. "Can I help you?" I called down, my voice friendly. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, swept over my cabin, my hand-built fence, and finally, me. They narrowed in disapproval. "I am Brenda McLaughlin," she announced, her voice crisp and authoritative. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association and lead broker for McLaughlin Prestige Properties." "Leo Vance," I said, wiping my hand on my jeans before realizing I was 20 feet in the air. "Nice to meet you." "Is it?" she countered, her tone suggesting it was anything but. She pointed a finger, adorned with a large diamond ring, toward my roof. "Those shingles. What color do you call that?" I glanced up. "It's a kind of weathered slate gray. I suppose." I thought it fit the rustic look. Her jaw tightened. The approved palette for all roofing materials in the Whispering Pines community is Earthen Harmony. It consists of forest brown, autumn ochre, and Tuscan earth. Weathered slate gray is not, and has never been, an approved color. It creates visual discord and negatively impacts the meticulously curated aesthetic of our neighborhood. I almost laughed. My 2 acres were a private, unplatted parcel, an island that had existed long before the first surveyor's stake for Whispering Pines was ever hammered into the ground. I was no more a part of her HOA than the moon was. "Mrs. McLaughlin," I said, keeping my tone polite and even, "I appreciate you letting me know, but my property isn't actually part of the Whispering Pines HOA. I'm not subject to the bylaws." A flicker of something cold and hard passed through her eyes. It was a look I recognized. It was the look of an opponent who has just discovered that the easy victory they anticipated might require more effort. "All properties adjacent to our community are expected to maintain a standard of appearance commensurate with our own," she stated, her voice losing its last pretense of civility. "This rustic experiment of yours is an eyesore. It is a direct threat to the property values I have spent 15 years building. This is not a request. Mr. Vance, it's a directive. You will receive a formal notice of non-compliance. I suggest you take it very, very seriously." She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel, slid back into her Lexus, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering chill of her disapproval. I stood on the ladder, the smell of linseed oil and fresh-cut pine suddenly seeming less sweet. My peaceful solitude had been breached. I had spent 2 years fighting legal ghosts to win this land. I had a sickening feeling I was about to spend the next 2 fighting a very real monster. The first formal notice arrived a week later. It was not placed in my mailbox, but rather affixed to my front door with a piece of aggressive, industrial-strength tape that peeled off a sliver of my carefully applied varnish. The document itself was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, printed on thick, creamy cardstock, with the Whispering Pines Estates logo embossed in gold at the top. It was titled, "Courtesy Notice of Aesthetic Violation." It listed, in excruciating detail, my supposed infractions. The non-compliant roofing material. Weathered slate gray was at the top of the list, but she hadn't stopped there. My split-rail fence, which I had built myself from cedar logs, was cited as an unapproved and rustic boundary marker, lacking in modern sophistication. My mailbox, a simple but sturdy wooden box on a post, was a non-standard mail receptacle in violation of community-wide uniformity standards. The notice concluded with a thinly veiled threat. Failure to remedy these deficiencies within 30 days will result in the levying of fines, as outlined in the Whispering Pines covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I read it, and a part of me I thought I'd left behind in a glass tower in Manhattan stirred. My mind, almost by instinct, began to deconstruct the document not as a neighborly dispute, but as a legal filing. Courtesy notice, a legally meaningless term. Aesthetic violation subjective, and notoriously difficult to enforce, even within a binding HOA. As outlined in the Whispering Pines, CC&Rs, the key phrase, the entire document was predicated on an authority she did not possess. My property was not encumbered by her covenants. Her notice was, in legal terms, toilet paper. I considered my options. I could have a local lawyer send a polite but firm cease and desist letter, clarifying my property's legal status. But I knew Brenda McLaughlin, a person who uses meticulously curated aesthetic in a casual conversation is not one to be deterred by a single letter. It would be seen as a challenge. She would escalate. My goal was peace, not a protracted legal skirmish. So, I chose a different path, strategic inaction. I did nothing. I filed her notice in a new folder I labeled McLaughlin, and I went back to my work. My inaction drove her to madness. 2 weeks later, a second notice arrived. This one titled Official Notice of Violation and Fine Assessment. The fines were comical in their specificity. $100 for non-compliant roofing material, $50 for unapproved fencing, $25 for non-standard mail receptacle. At the bottom was a handwritten note in sharp, angry cursive. Ignoring your responsibilities to this community will prove to be a costly mistake. Mr. Vance. I chuckled and filed it away with the first notice. I was beginning to understand her pathology. She was a real estate broker. Her world was governed by appearances, by curb appeal, by the quantifiable notion that conformity equals value. My cabin, a bastion of individuality on the edge of her homogenized world, was an affront to her entire worldview. It was a rogue data point in her spreadsheet of property values. One evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, when I made a call. Judge Abernathy, it's Leo Vance. Leo, my boy, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How's the hermit life? Judge Abernathy was my mentor, a retired federal judge with a mind like a steel trap, and the man who had signed my final quiet title judgment. It's peaceful, mostly, I said. But I seem to have acquired an admirer, the local HOA president. I explained the situation with Brenda, the notices, the ridiculous fines. The judge let out a hearty laugh that boomed over the phone. Son, you spent your entire career dealing with the most predatory corporate litigators on the planet, and you're being vexed by a suburban queen bee? I don't want to fight. Judge, I just want to be left alone. I understand, he said, his tone softening. But people like that, Leo, their power is built on the assumption that everyone will follow their imaginary rules. When you don't, it's not just a disagreement, it's an existential threat to them. Your very existence is a violation. Be careful. A cornered animal is a dangerous one. His words were prophetic, by ignoring her fake fines. I wasn't just dismissing her. I was invalidating her. I was demonstrating the powerlessness of her position. And that was something she could not abide. Her next move, I suspected, would be to move beyond paper threats and into the physical realm. My quiet little war of attrition was about to get much uglier. I added the second notice to my file, already picturing the deposition I would one day take, with these documents marked as Exhibit A and Exhibit B. The old habits, it seemed, died hard. The news that changed everything broke on a Thursday. It wasn't a whisper. It was a thunderclap that echoed through the entire county. EtherCorp, a trillion-dollar tech giant, announced it was building its new global headquarters, a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar campus, just 2 miles north of Whispering Pines. The effect on local real estate was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Properties that had been on the market for months were suddenly in bidding wars. Land values didn't just climb, they launched into orbit. A local news channel ran a segment on the announcement, showing architectural renderings of the futuristic campus. Then, the reporter stood in front of a topographical map. The biggest challenge for EtherCorp, she explained, is access. Due to the protected wetlands to the east and the granite ridges to the west, there is only one viable corridor for the required new highway interchange. That corridor runs right through this small, previously undeveloped area. Her finger landed on a map. It landed directly on my 2 acres. Overnight, my quiet, secluded cabin, which I had spent a year restoring, became the most valuable piece of real estate in the state. My 25-cent investment was, according to the breathless speculation of real estate analysts, now worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million. I felt a dizzying mix of elation and dread. This was the kind of windfall I used to engineer for my clients. A perfect storm of location, timing, and opportunity. But it also painted a colossal target on my back. A target that Brenda McLaughlin could not possibly ignore. Her first move was subtle. The HOA notices stopped. Instead, she tried a different tactic, feigned friendship. She appeared at my driveway one afternoon, not in her Lexus, but in a golf cart, bearing a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Leo," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that was far more alarming than her previous hostility. "We got off on the wrong foot. With this incredible news from EtherCorp, we're all going to be neighbors for a long time. I wanted to properly welcome you." I knew this for what it was, a reconnaissance mission. She was probing, trying to gauge my intentions. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, accepting the cookies but making no move to invite her further onto my property. "You know," she said, her eyes scanning my land. "I've been in real estate in this county for 20 years. A deal of this magnitude. It requires a certain expertise to navigate. A local touch. If you decide to sell, you'll need the right representation to maximize your value. My firm would be the logical choice." It was a soft sell, but the message was clear. I know what you have, and I want a piece of it. "I'm not thinking about selling right now," I said calmly. "I just finished building the place." Her smile tightened fractionally. "Of course. Well, the offer stands. It's a shark tank out there. Leo, you wouldn't want to get eaten alive." When her charm offensive failed, her tactics shifted back to hostility, but with a new, vicious edge. The first act of physical aggression was small, deniable, but deeply personal. I had planted a row of heritage apple saplings along the southern edge of my property, tiny, hopeful little sticks that I dreamed would one day grow into a small orchard. One morning, I came out to find all 6 of them snapped in half. The clean breaks suggesting a deliberate, forceful act. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle. It could have been deer, as anyone would assume. But lying in the grass, just a few feet from the carnage, was a single, pristine Titleist golf ball, embossed with the gold WP logo of the Whispering Pines Golf Club. It was a calling card. My blood ran cold with a fury I hadn't felt in years. This was no longer about aesthetics. This was a direct, physical attack. She was marking her territory, trying to intimidate me, to show me that she could reach out and destroy what I cared about with impunity. That afternoon, I didn't call the police. I made a different call, to a specialized industrial supplier I had used in my old life. "I need a full geotechnical surveying package," I told the sales rep. "I need time-lapse imaging, seismic sensors, and long-range directional microphones. The cameras need to be indistinguishable from natural rock formations. That's our remote quarry monitoring setup, sir," the rep said, a little confused. "It's for monitoring blasting sites. What's your application?" "I have a boundary dispute," I said, "and I want a complete, unimpeachable record of any and all incursions." 2 days later, a discreet work van delivered several heavy crates. I spent the next 48 hours deploying the system. The cameras were lumps of polymer that looked exactly like the local granite, their lenses hidden in plain sight. I buried the seismic sensors along my property line and concealed the microphones in a hollow log. It was a surveillance network that would have been overkill for a medium-sized country, let alone a 2-acre plot of land. But Brenda McLaughlin had escalated this from a nuisance to a threat. She had declared war on my peace. She had no idea that she was goading a man who had not only written the book on this kind of warfare, but had also invented several of the chapters. With my silent, stone-faced sentinels in place, I waited. Brenda, likely emboldened by the lack of response to her apple tree massacre, escalated her campaign to the next logical battlefield: public opinion. She launched a campaign of slander and misinformation on the Whispering Pines community online forum, a private website where residents exchanged neighborhood gossip and organized social events. Her first post was a masterclass in concern trolling. It was titled, "A Note of Caution Regarding the EtherCorp Development." Dear neighbors, it began. While we are all thrilled by the positive economic implications of the EtherCorp campus, I feel it is my duty, as your HOA president and a concerned homeowner, to highlight a potential threat to our community's character and tranquility. As many of you know, the crucial access road is slated to run through the unplatted parcel of land adjacent to our neighborhood. The property with the dilapidated old cabin. Dilapidated, I had hand-sanded and sealed every log on that cabin myself. The ownership of this parcel has always been murky, she continued, expertly planting the seed of doubt. A man has recently appeared, claiming ownership and undertaking extensive construction. We don't know who this man is, where he came from, or how he came to control this vital piece of land. What we do know is that he is not a member of our community and has, to date, shown a complete disregard for our standards and values. The post ended with a call to action. I urge you all to be wary. Shady, opportunistic developers are a plague. They swoop in, make their fortune, and leave communities like ours to deal with the noise, the traffic, and the destruction of our peaceful way of life. We must stand united to protect Whispering Pines from this outside threat. The comment section exploded. Her acolytes and allies immediately chimed in. Thank you for the warning, Brenda. We have to protect our property values. I knew there was something strange about that guy. A squatter. Probably. How did he even get that land? Sounds illegal to me. She had brilliantly framed the narrative. I was no longer Leo, the quiet guy who was fixing up the old cabin. I was a shady developer, a mysterious and hostile outside threat. She was positioning herself as the valiant protector of their suburban paradise against the big, bad wolf. The effects were immediate and chilling. The friendly waves from neighbors stopped. When I drove into town, I saw Whispering Pines residents whispering to each other as I passed, their eyes following me with suspicion. I was being socially isolated, painted as a villain in a story of her own creation. The peace I had worked so hard to find was being systematically dismantled, replaced by an atmosphere of hostility and distrust. I sat in my cabin, scrolling through the forum, a cold fury building in my chest. This was a classic tactic from my old playbook: control the narrative, isolate the target, and create a pretext for more aggressive action. She was building a public case against me, brick by brick, lie by lie. My first instinct was to fight back, to log on and post the reams of legal documents proving my ownership, to expose her lies. But I knew it would be pointless. It would be my word against the established, trusted community leader. I would look defensive and desperate. Instead, I opened my secure surveillance feed. I watched the high-resolution, time-lapsed footage of my property line. And there she was. The day before, under the cover of a cloudy afternoon, Brenda McLaughlin had trespassed onto my property. The footage was undeniable. She walked about 20 feet past the property markers, picked up a bag of trash fast food wrappers, and empty cans she had clearly brought with her, and deliberately dumped it into the small creek that ran through my land. The act was quick, precise, and utterly malicious. Then, she took out her phone and took several pictures of the littered creek on my unkept property before retreating. I saved the video file, meticulously logging the date and time. This was her next move. She was manufacturing evidence to support her narrative of me being a negligent, destructive presence. She was slandering me, not just with words, but with staged actions. I thought back to a deposition I had once conducted in a particularly nasty corporate espionage case. The opposing CEO had sworn up and down that his company had developed a proprietary technology independently. I had then played a secret video recording of him meeting with a disgruntled engineer from my client's company in a hotel bar, exchanging a briefcase for a hard drive. The man's face had collapsed, the edifice of his lies crumbling in an instant. Brenda was creating her own edifice of lies, and I, in my quiet cabin, was compiling the evidence that would one day bring it all crashing down. I added a new entry to my McLaughlin file: slander, libel, and intentional environmental contamination for the purpose of defamation. It was getting to be a very thick file. Having successfully poisoned the well of public opinion, Brenda moved to her next phase of attack, weaponizing government agencies. She was no longer content with her own imaginary authority. She now sought to bring the legitimate power of the state down upon me. It began with a formal complaint filed with the Serenity County Zoning and Planning Department. I received the notice by certified mail. It was a summons to appear at a public hearing of the zoning board. The complaint, filed by Brenda McLaughlin on behalf of the Whispering Pines HOA, alleged a litany of violations. It claimed my property was an illegal, unrecorded subdivision. It claimed my extensive renovations on the cabin constituted the construction of a new dwelling and had been done without the proper permits. It claimed my septic system was improperly installed and was a potential environmental hazard. The complaint requested an immediate and permanent stop work order on my property and a full investigation, with the potential for massive fines and even the condemnation of my cabin. It was a brilliant, viciously effective attack. A zoning dispute, unlike her HOA notices, had real teeth. It could tie me up in bureaucratic red tape for months, or even years. It would create a legal cloud over my property, potentially jeopardizing any future deal with EtherCorp. She wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to financially cripple me. On the day of the hearing, the small county boardroom was packed. Brenda had rallied the troops. At least 24 Whispering Pines residents were there, all wearing matching green polo shirts that said, "Protect our pines." They sat in a grim, united block, with Brenda and her silent husband in the front row. A reporter from the local newspaper was present, a clear sign that Brenda had tipped off the media, hoping to publicly humiliate me. When my case was called, the board chairman, a stern-looking man named Mr. Henderson, peered at me over his glasses. "Mr. Vance, these are very serious allegations. The board has already issued a temporary stop work order pending the outcome of this hearing. How do you respond?" Brenda was represented by a slick-looking local attorney. I had chosen to represent myself. I walked to the podium, not with a briefcase, but with a single, heavy, leather-bound binder. "Mr. Chairman, members of the board," I began, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Leo Vance. The claims made by Mrs. McLaughlin are not just false. They are a malicious and frivolous abuse of this board's time and resources." Brenda's lawyer scoffed. "Mr. Vance, this is a formal hearing, not a place for theatrics. Do you have permits for your construction? Yes or no?" "I have more than that," I said. I opened my binder. "This," I said, placing a thick, beautifully rendered document on the overhead projector, is a certified copy of the original 1923 survey of the Abernathy tract, of which my 2-acre parcel is the last remaining unsubdivided portion. As you can see, it has existed as a discrete legal entity for over a century. It is not an illegal subdivision. I replaced it with another document. This is a certified copy of the complete quiet title judgment issued by Judge Abernathy of the State Superior Court, extinguishing all prior claims and affirming my clear and unencumbered title to the property. I continued, my voice even and methodical. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out my case with a precision and clarity that left the room silent. I produced every single permit for my renovation, each one stamped and approved by the county. I produced the geological survey and percolation test results for my septic system, which not only met, but exceeded state requirements. I produced historical records and affidavits, proving the cabin had been a continuous dwelling for nearly 100 years, grandfathering it in under any modern zoning changes. It was an overwhelming, irrefutable display of due diligence. It was the kind of exhaustive legal preparation I had once used to secure billion-dollar land deals. Using it here, in this small room, to defend my cabin felt like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. As I spoke, I didn't just present facts. I used the language of my old profession. I spoke of pre-existing non-conforming use, of the doctrine of laches, and of estoppel against municipal enforcement. The legal jargon, which was second nature to me, had a visible effect on the board. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to respect, and then to a dawning realization. They were not dealing with some amateur builder. They were dealing with an expert. Finally, I turned to Brenda. Mrs. McLaughlin has asserted that my property is a threat to her community. The truth is, the only threat here is her willingness to file a fraudulent complaint, under oath, in a desperate attempt to harass a private citizen. This entire proceeding is based not on a legitimate grievance, but on her personal animosity and, I suspect, her desire to interfere with my property rights for her own financial gain. The chairman, Mr. Henderson, looked at Brenda's lawyer. Do you have any response to Mr. Vance's documentation? The lawyer, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable, stammered. We were operating on the information provided by my client. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henderson banged his gavel. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice. The stop work order is rescinded. Effective immediately. Mr. Vance, I apologize for the inconvenience. The board does not appreciate being used as a pawn in a neighborhood squabble. I nodded, closed my binder, and walked out of the room. The Whispering Pines residents stared at me, their unified hostility now replaced by confusion and doubt. Brenda's face was a mask of incandescent fury. I had not just won. I had humiliated her in a public forum. I had used the very system she had tried to weaponize against me to expose her as a liar. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this would not be the end. A public defeat of this magnitude would only push her to a final, desperate, and far more dangerous act. After her humiliating defeat at the zoning board, Brenda disappeared from view for several weeks. The Whispering Pines online forum fell silent. There were no more notices, no more golf cart patrols. It was an unnerving, pregnant pause, the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. I knew she wasn't defeated. She was rearming. She had failed to beat me using her own rules and had failed to beat me using the county's rules. Now, she would resort to the one arena where she felt she had the home field advantage, the law, twisted to serve her own ends. The threat when it came, was delivered by a grim-faced process server. It was a thick envelope from a prestigious and notoriously aggressive law firm in the state capital. Inside was a formal notice of lawsuit and an ultimatum. The legal theory was audacious in its mendacity. The lawsuit. Whispering Pines Estates, HOA v. Leo Vance, claimed that the HOA was the rightful owner of my 2-acre property. Their argument was a contorted mess of prescriptive easement and adverse possession. They claimed that for over a decade, the HOA's landscaping crews had been maintaining the wooded buffer zone between our properties, which was, in fact, my land, by clearing brush and removing fallen trees. This open and notorious use, they argued, established their claim to the land over time. They further claimed that my quiet title action was legally defective, a fraud upon the court, and that they were the true successors in interest to the property. It was, legally speaking, a fantasy, an absolute fiction. A prescriptive easement requires continuous use without the owner's permission, and adverse possession requires paying property taxes, which they had never done. My quiet title action had been adjudicated by a superior court judge and was legally unassailable. The lawsuit was a phantom, a legal scarecrow designed to do one thing: cloud my title. A clouded title would make it impossible for me to sell the land to Ether Corp. Or to anyone else. It would put my $10 million windfall on indefinite hold, trapping me in a legal quagmire that could take years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to resolve. And then came the ultimatum, laid out in the final paragraph. In the interest of avoiding a protracted and costly legal battle for all parties. The letter read, "The Whispering Pines HOA is prepared to offer Mr. Vance a settlement. In exchange for Mr. Vance signing over a quitclaim deed to the property, the HOA will pay him the sum of $50,000 and forgive all outstanding fines." $50,000 for a property worth $10 million. It was an insult, wrapped in a threat. They were trying to extort my land from me, using the threat of a frivolous, ruinous lawsuit as their weapon. This was Brenda's masterpiece. It was a direct, personal, and potentially devastating attack. She was threatening not just my peace, but my financial future. She was trying to steal the fruits of my labor, the result of my 2 years of painstaking legal work and my year of backbreaking physical work, for pennies on the dollar. I sat on my porch, the letter in my hand, and a slow, cold anger began to build inside me. It was an anger I hadn't felt since my days in the corporate trenches. The righteous fury of seeing a predator try to steal something through lies and intimidation. For months, I had been playing defense. I had been reacting, responding, enduring. I had been trying to be Leo, the peaceful cabin owner. But Brenda, with this final, egregious act, had made a fatal error. She had finally managed to piss off Leo Vance, Esquire. I went inside and pulled out the hard drive containing my surveillance footage. I found the video of Brenda dumping trash in my creek. Then I found another file, one I hadn't looked at in a while. It was audio from one of the directional microphones, recorded a few weeks ago. It had captured a conversation between Brenda and her husband, Bob, in their backyard. "This lawsuit is insane." "Brenda," Bob's voice was panicked. "We can't win. This guy is a legal expert. He took the zoning board apart." "Shut up, Bob." Brenda's voice was a low snarl. "He's just one man. We have the HOA's entire legal fund. We'll bury him in motions. We'll bankrupt him. He'll have to sell. And when he does, he'll sell to us. On our terms." "It's not right," Bob protested. "Right has nothing to do with it," she shot back. It's about winning. That land is our ticket. It's our legacy. I've worked too hard, for too long, to let some nobody who got lucky with a 25-cent filing fee steal it from me. I will burn him to the ground before I let that happen. I will burn him to the ground. I saved the audio file. I picked up the phone and called Judge Abernathy. "Judge," I said, "remember how you told me a cornered animal is a dangerous one? Well, the animal just tried to bite, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to put it down." I then called my old firm. I wasn't asking for a lawyer. I was assembling a war council. I explained the situation to the senior partners, men with whom I had conquered legal empires. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't just a man with a cabin. I was a general, preparing for a battle she never should have started. The lawsuit wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It was the formal declaration of war I had been waiting for, and it gave me the legal justification to deploy my entire arsenal. Brenda McLaughlin wanted a legal fight. She had no idea she was about to face the corporate equivalent of the Seventh Fleet. Brenda, convinced she held the winning hand, decided to stage her triumph in a public forum. She called an emergency community town hall at the Whispering Pines Clubhouse. The stated purpose was to update residents on the ongoing litigation, to reclaim our community's rightful property, and to present a final offer to the opposing party. She invited the local news, framing the event as a David and Goliath story, the small, plucky community standing up to a greedy, opportunistic developer. She was casting herself as the hero, confident that I would be too intimidated by the public pressure and the threat of a ruinous lawsuit to do anything but capitulate. It was to be her coronation. I arrived alone, dressed not in a suit, but in the same simple jeans and work shirt I wore every day. The clubhouse was packed. The green-shirted Protect Our Pines Brigade was out in full force, their faces a mixture of self-righteous anger and anticipation. The news cameras were set up in the back. Brenda stood at a lectern on a small stage, flanked by her smarmy lawyer and her husband, Bob, who looked distinctly ill. She radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. She began with a rousing speech, a 20-minute diatribe of carefully constructed lies and half-truths. She spoke of the sacred duty to protect their property values, of the dubious legality of my ownership, and of the moral imperative to reclaim the land for the community. She painted me as an interloper, a phantom who had appeared from nowhere to steal their collective birthright. "For months, we have tried to reason with Mr. Vance," she proclaimed, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "We have tried to be good neighbors, but he has met our every overture with defiance and contempt. Therefore, we were left with no choice but to take legal action." She gestured to a large screen behind her, which showed a satellite image of my property, colored in an aggressive red. "This land," she declared, "belongs to Whispering Pines." The room erupted in applause. She let it die down, then looked directly at me, a predatory smile playing on her lips. "But we are a reasonable community. We believe in second chances. So, we have invited Mr. Vance here tonight to present him with one final, generous offer. In front of you all, his future neighbors. Mr. Vance, will you please join me on the stage?" Every eye in the room turned to me. The cameras zoomed in. This was the moment she had engineered. The public shaming. The final pressure tactic. I walked calmly through the parting crowd and up the small set of stairs to the stage. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "my attorney has the paperwork right here. Sign over the deed to your cabin, and we will give you a check for $50,000, and this whole unfortunate business can be put behind us. Refuse, And we will see you in court. We will drain your resources. We will cloud your title for a decade. And in the end, we will take the land anyway. What is your answer?" I stepped up to the lectern. I didn't even look at her. I looked out at the crowd, at the reporter, at the rolling cameras. "Good evening," I began, my voice quiet but carrying through the microphone to every corner of the silent room. "My name is Leo Vance. Mrs. McLaughlin is correct about one thing. I am not a member of your community. What she has failed to grasp is the nature of the community I do belong to." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. For 10 years, prior to my retirement, I was senior counsel for strategic acquisitions at the Carlyle Group. Before that, I was with Blackstone. My entire professional life was dedicated to one thing: litigating and acquiring high-value, contested real estate. I didn't just stumble upon that cabin, Mrs. McLaughlin. I selected it from a portfolio of hundreds of legally distressed properties across the country. I chose it specifically for its impossibly tangled title. As a final intellectual exercise before I retired, I spent 2 years and a sum of money that would make your head spin conducting what Judge Abernathy has called the most comprehensive and legally unassailable quiet title action in the history of this state. A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's smile flickered. Her lawyer shifted on his feet. "This lawsuit," I continued, holding up the legal papers she had served me, "is not just frivolous, a fact which I'm sure your own counsel has advised you. It is a textbook case of barratry and malicious prosecution. It is a fraudulent document, based on a fraudulent premise, filed for the sole purpose of extorting property. It is, in short, a crime." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small remote. "Mrs. McLaughlin has spoken of my character. Let's talk about hers." I clicked the remote. The image of my property on the screen behind me was replaced by crystal clear, time-stamped video. It was Brenda, sneaking onto my land and dumping a bag of trash into my creek. The crowd gasped. I clicked again. The screen now showed a signed, notarized affidavit. "This is from the owner of your HOA's landscaping company. It states, under penalty of perjury, that you paid him, with HOA funds, to trespass onto my property and destroy 6 of my apple trees, under the guise of clearing brush near the property line." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, angrier. People were turning to look at Brenda, their expressions shifting from support to outrage. Her face had gone from confident to confused, to a mask of pale, horrified shock. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard tone, "there is the matter of this lawsuit itself." I clicked the remote again. The speakers in the room crackled to life, playing the audio from my directional microphone. Brenda's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the room. "He's just one man. We have the HOA's entire legal fund. We'll bury him in motions. We'll bankrupt him. I will burn him to the ground before I let that happen." The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of her own recorded voice damning her. I turned to look at her. The color had drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You see," I said, my voice now soft, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. "You made a critical error in your calculations. Brenda, you thought you were fighting a lonely hermit in a cabin. You thought you could burn him to the ground. But you weren't fighting a hermit. You were fighting me. And my answer to your offer is no. Instead, I have a counteroffer. My attorneys will be filing a multi-million-dollar countersuit against this HOA for slander of title in the morning. We will also be filing for criminal charges against you, personally, for attempted extortion, fraud, and witness tampering. And every single member of this HOA who paid the special assessment to fund this fraudulent lawsuit will be named as a co-conspirator. I looked out at the horrified faces in the crowd. Unless, of course, the board of this HOA is recalled, and this lawsuit is withdrawn by 9 tomorrow morning. The choice is yours. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Brenda's little empire crumbled to dust overnight. Faced with my countersuit and the very real threat of criminal charges, the homeowners of Whispering Pines revolted. An emergency board meeting was held that very night. Brenda was not just recalled. She was removed in disgrace, her name becoming a curse word in the community she had once ruled with an iron fist. The lawsuit against me was dropped before the sun came up. But that was only the beginning. My legal team, now fully engaged, was not so forgiving. We pursued a civil suit against Brenda and her husband personally for the damages to my property and for slander of title, which had temporarily jeopardized the EtherCorp negotiations. Presented with the video, the audio, and the landscaper's affidavit, their lawyers advised them to settle immediately. The settlement was substantial enough to ensure they would have to sell their home and likely their brokerage to pay it. The State Real Estate Board, alerted to their fraudulent activities, launched its own investigation, which resulted in the permanent revocation of their licenses. They sold their house at a loss and left town in shame, their carefully constructed world of prestige and power utterly destroyed. The HOA, under new, humbled, and far more reasonable leadership, sent me a formal, groveling letter of apology. My deal with EtherCorp went through without a hitch. The $10 million wire transfer hit my account on a Tuesday. It was a number so large it felt abstract, unreal. The next day, I met with the new HOA board and a team of architects. I used $2 million of the proceeds to fund the creation of the Vance Nature Preserve, a beautifully landscaped public park and trail system on a 10-acre portion of my remaining land, gifted to the community with a permanent conservation easement to ensure it could never be developed. It was a gesture of peace, a way of turning the ugliness of the fight into something beautiful and lasting. With the park as a permanent buffer, my cabin was more peaceful and secluded than ever. The whispers and hostile stares from the neighbors were replaced with friendly waves and grateful smiles. I had my peace. I had my solitude. I had won. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, as I sit on my porch and look out at the families enjoying the park that bore my name, I think about that 25-cent filing fee. It was the best investment I ever made. It bought me more than a cabin, more than a fortune. It bought me a home, and the hard-won tranquility I had been searching for my entire life.